On a summer day in Newport, a farm girl steps off a train with only a worn carpetbag and a desperate hope: save her family's land or lose everything. At the edge of the roaring Atlantic, Seawind Mansion rises in stone and glass, ruled by a powerful tycoon with ghosts of his own, and a cruel wager he will soon regret. When Samantha crosses that threshold, pride, class, and desire collide in a game she never agreed to play. Tell me, from where in the world are you listening to this story? And what do you love most about historical romances? The drama, the forbidden love, or the promise of redemption? Newport, Rhode Island. Summer of 1895. The train hissed as it pulled into the station, its iron wheels exhaling steam into the soft, salt-laced air of Newport. Samantha Talbot stepped onto the platform with a single carpetbag in hand, and the weight of her family's hopes pressed firmly upon her slender shoulders. Her boots, worn from years of tilling the earth, met the polished stone with a hesitation that betrayed her resolve. She stood very still for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar scent of the sea, the chatter of porters in linen vests, the distant clatter of hooves against cobblestone. She had never seen the ocean until that day. Her dress, a plain, dusty blue of coarse cotton, clung slightly to her from the long journey. It was patched at the hem and faded at the seams, but she had scrubbed it clean by hand the night before, determined to arrive not as a beggar, but as a worker with pride. Her chestnut-brown hair, thick and unruly, was pinned in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, and wisps escaped to curl damply against her temples. A calloused hand reached instinctively to smooth them, though she knew it was a lost cause in the coastal breeze. The carriage that awaited her was not lavish, but it bore the unmistakable emblem of wealth: lacquered wheels, an imported horse, and a liveried driver who glanced at her with polite indifference. She climbed inside, holding her carpetbag close to her chest, and peered through the window as the town passed by. Manicured hedgerows, painted cottages, and grand homes of marble and iron that seemed to scorn the very notion of hardship. Seawind rose on the cliffs like something conjured from a fairy tale or a warning. Its stone facade, weathered by salt and sun, overlooked the vast Atlantic with regal indifference. Ivy clung to its eastern walls like whispered secrets, and tall windows shimmered in the golden light of late afternoon. Samantha swallowed hard. This was not a farmhouse or a boarding house. This was a world apart. Inside, she was greeted not with warmth, but with order. "Miss Talbot, is it?" came a crisp voice. Mrs. Green, the housekeeper, was a stout woman with iron-grey hair and eyes as sharp as embroidery needles. Her starched apron did not ruffle when she moved, and her voice suggested she had seen hundreds like Samantha before, and forgotten none of them. "You're to report to the lower east wing. Work begins at dawn." Samantha nodded, her hazel-green eyes steady, though her heart pounded. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." The staff corridors were a maze of narrow halls, worn floorboards, and whispers. Some of the other maids glanced her way, murmuring behind porcelain mugs and folded linens. A footman laughed too loudly when she asked for directions to the scullery. A red-haired girl offered her a glance of pure disdain, and muttered something about dirt under her nails. That night, as she lay on a thin mattress in a servant's dormitory, staring at the shadowed beams above, Samantha said nothing, but she did not cry. Instead, she clutched the letter offering her temporary work and traced the signature at the bottom: Mrs. Green, head of household. Beneath that, the elegant seal of Nathaniel Pembry, Esq. She had never met a man with a title before. 3 days passed in quiet labor. Samantha scrubbed floors until her back ached, carried buckets of coal that blackened her apron, and polished brass banisters that reflected her flushed, freckled cheeks. She kept her gaze low, her posture straight. Mrs. Green watched her closely but said little. There was no praise, but no rebuke either. Then came the evening that would unbalance the rhythm of her world. Samantha was hurrying through the east corridor, balancing a silver tray laden with teacups, when she rounded a corner and collided with a wall of wool and scent. The tray clattered to the floor, porcelain shattered like snow. I'm so sorry," she gasped, dropping to her knees. A man stood before her, tall, motionless, cast in shadow and lamplight. His evening coat was of the finest black cloth, his cravat snow-white and rigid. The pale blue-grey of his eyes fixed on her with unsettling precision. He did not flinch, did not speak, simply studied her, her ruddy cheeks, her rough fingers, her breath caught halfway between shame and defiance. Samantha looked up fully then. Her eyes met his, not lowered, not broken, simply honest. In that instant, something flickered across his face. Not surprise, not annoyance, something far quieter and far more dangerous. "You're the new girl from Pennsylvania," he said at last, his voice low, distinct and unreadable. "Yes, sir. You're bleeding." She looked down. A shard of porcelain had cut her palm. She hadn't even noticed. She stood, hastily wiping it on her apron, flustered. "I'll clean it up," she said, bending to gather the broken cups. He did not move to help, but he also did not leave. "What's your name?" he asked. "Samantha Talbot." He nodded once. "Be careful, Miss Talbot. Seawind is full of sharp things." And with that he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hall like the opening bars of a melody she did not yet recognize. Samantha stood very still, hand trembling, porcelain in her palm, blood on her apron. She had just met Nathaniel Pembry, and she could already feel that something inside her life had shifted, something that would not be easily put back into place. The gaslights in the drawing room of Seawind glowed like small, captured suns, casting halos of amber light onto damask wallpaper and polished mahogany. The air was thick with the sweet bite of tobacco smoke, the clink of crystal tumblers, and the low hum of masculine laughter that echoed like distant thunder. Outside, the waves crashed against the Newport cliffs in a rhythm that only the sea understood, ancient and indifferent to the games of men. Nathaniel Pembry leaned back in his carved walnut chair, a glass of brandy in one hand, his expression a mask of composed amusement. His dark hair had been freshly combed, parted with precision, and his tailored black waistcoat bore a faint scent of bay rum and salt air. Around him gathered the titans of summer society, steel barons, railroad magnates and banking heirs, their fortunes gleaming in cufflinks and cigar cases, their mouths sharp with stories of acquisition and conquest. The conversation that evening had wandered from politics to property, from European scandals to the rising nuisance of organized labor. But it was boredom that hung thickest in the room, a particular boredom that only the supremely wealthy could afford. And from that boredom, cruelty often bloomed. "So, Nathaniel," drawled Charles Eddington III, a paunchy air with a gold watch and silver tongue, "what's this I hear about you plucking some country girl from the kitchens, teaching her to read no less? How very pastoral." A ripple of amusement passed through the room. Nathaniel's lips curved faintly, but his eyes did not join the smile. "Seawind is not a prison, Charles. If someone shows initiative, I reward it." "Initiative," echoed another man, Trenton Hargrove, whose mills fed coal to half the northeast. "Or innocence you find amusing?" The suggestion hung in the air like cigar smoke, heavy and lewd. Nathaniel's fingers tapped once against the rim of his glass. "Perhaps both." Eddington raised his brows. "Come now, we've all seen her. That slip of a girl with dirt under her nails and eyes too wide for her face." "Hazel green," Nathaniel said before he could stop himself. A pause, then laughter. "Ah, so you've been paying attention. I notice my staff, yes." "Then let's make it interesting," Eddington said, leaning forward, his cheeks flushed from drink. "A wager, gentlemen. Pembry here fancies himself a sculptor of clay. I say the girl won't last the season, not with books nor ballrooms. You can polish a shoe, but a farm girl's soul remains stubborn." "How much?" asked Hargrove, his eyes gleaming. 2,000, Eddington said without hesitation. To anyone who proves Pembrey's transformation ends in failure or scandal. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He did not look at them. He looked at the fire. And if she succeeds, he asked softly. Then you can keep your prize, said Eddington, and the rest of us will acknowledge your skills in more than shipping and steel. The silence that followed was not approval, it was expectation. Nathaniel turned his glass once in his hand. The wager disgusted him. But what was more intolerable, walking away and letting them mock him, or proving them wrong and risking the very girl they were betting against? He looked up, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. Fine, he said. Let's play. Across the estate, beneath the weight of plaster ceilings and glittering chandeliers, Samantha Talbot scrubbed the grand staircase with a bucket of lye and lemon. Her apron was damp, her back ached, and a lock of hair had escaped her pins to cling stubbornly to her cheek. She did not know of the wager being laid in the drawing-room above her head. She did not hear her name tossed between laughter and brandy. All she knew was the sting of soap in her cuticles and the ache in her knees. And yet she hummed softly to herself, a folk tune her mother used to sing during planting season, a melody older than her fears. From the landing above, Miss Claribel Linton descended with the grace of a woman born to silk. Her emerald gown shimmered with imported lace, and her eyes, cold and sharp as frost, narrowed at the sight of Samantha. "Still here," she said, with a voice laced in honey and steel. Samantha stood quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am. Just finishing up." Claribel tilted her head. "You missed a spot." The point of her jeweled shoe tapped the marble. Samantha knelt again, cheeks flushed. She felt the woman's eyes on her scalp, watching not the work, but the worker. "They say you've been moved to better duties," Claribel murmured, folding her gloved hands. "Lessons, books, diction. Only for afternoon hours," Samantha replied carefully. "Mrs. Green arranged it." Claribel laughed. "Did she now? How charitable." She lingered a moment longer, then turned and continued her descent, her perfume trailing behind like memory. When Samantha stood again, the spot was clean, but her heart thudded unevenly, a faint unease blooming beneath her ribs. That night, in the servants' dining quarters, the laughter was loud and wine was passed freely. The cook's assistant told stories of the upstairs guests who danced too close, who drank too much, who argued behind closed doors. But Samantha ate in silence, her hands wrapped around her tin mug, her mind elsewhere. She was beginning to notice the way Nathaniel Pembrey watched her, not often, not for long, but with a quiet intensity that lingered, and she wondered what it meant. She had never been looked at like that before, not with hunger, not with contempt, but with something harder to name, something that made the air between them feel different, thinner. Later, as she walked the servant corridor toward her quarters, she passed the grand hallway where the chandelier hung like a crown of stars. There, just for a moment, she paused. The door to the drawing-room was ajar, voices still echoed. She heard her name. She turned away quickly, heart racing, but the laughter had already begun to fade, and somewhere, deep inside her, a thread had started to pull. The morning air that drifted through the high windows of sea wind carried the scent of sea salt and roses, tinged faintly with the metallic breath of the Atlantic. The estate stirred with the sound of servants rising, boots on stone floors, kettles beginning to whistle, the faint rattle of silver being prepared for breakfast trays. Yet, on this particular morning, Samantha Talbot was not headed to the scullery. Mrs. Green handed her a folded note sealed with the Pembrey crest. Samantha's hands, still raw from scrubbing, trembled slightly as she opened it. "You are to report to the West Library at 10 o'clock. Bring nothing." The signature below was unmistakable. Nathaniel Pembrey. She arrived promptly, her apron freshly laundered, and her hair twisted into a tighter knot than usual. The West Library was unlike anything she had ever seen. 2 stories of oak shelves, a domed ceiling painted with faded constellations, and a scent of leather bindings, and knowledge long kept in silence. She entered cautiously, unsure if she belonged. Nathaniel stood at the far end of the room, near a large window that framed the sea like a portrait. He wore a dove-grey morning coat and held a book in his hand, though he did not appear to be reading it. "Miss Talbot," he said without turning, "do you know how to read?" She straightened. "A little, sir. I can read labels and signs, scriptures mostly. My mother taught me letters. And writing. Some." He finally looked at her. There was nothing flirtatious in his gaze, only calculation. "You will begin lessons today, reading, writing, diction, and eventually manners." She blinked. "Why?" He returned the book to its shelf with quiet precision. "Because education is currency, Miss Talbot, and because you may find greater use in this world beyond polishing brass." She hesitated. "Are you saying I'm to stop cleaning?" "In part. You'll still have duties, but your afternoons will be reserved for instruction. Mrs. Green has approved the arrangement." That was a lie. Mrs. Green had been informed, not consulted. Samantha folded the note and held it between her fingers like something fragile. "And if I refuse?" Nathaniel's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "You won't." Later that day, Samantha stood before the full-length mirror in the seamstress's quarters. The woman, a stout figure with a mouth full of pins, tugged at the fabric pinned to her shoulders. "Hold still." The dress was pale mauve, made of soft muslin, with a modest bustle and delicate lace at the collar. It was unlike anything Samantha had ever worn, lighter than air, smelling faintly of starch and lavender. "It's not for show," the seamstress muttered. "You're not to be paraded about, just something decent, something that says you're not scrubbing floors anymore." Samantha said nothing. Her reflection stared back at her, a farm girl's bones draped in a stranger's skin. Her first lesson was in a small sunroom, where ivy curled against the glass. An elderly tutor, Mr. Ashcroft, greeted her with a curt nod and handed her a volume of poetry. Her fingers stumbled over the printed words, and her voice caught on phrases she didn't understand. But she persisted. Every afternoon followed the same rhythm, reading aloud, copying passages, practicing enunciation. Her tongue wrestled with words like resplendent and delicacy. Her hand cramped as she traced letters with careful ink. Between lessons, she returned to chores, less arduous now, more symbolic. Arranging flowers in the drawing room, folding lace napkins for afternoon tea, brushing dust from shelves in rooms no one entered. The household staff began to whisper, "She eats in the East Wing now. Did you see her new dress?" She curtsied to Mr. Pembry. One morning, as Samantha adjusted a vase in the music room, she felt eyes on her back. She turned. Mrs. Green stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her apron. "You're not where you began," the older woman said quietly. Samantha set the vase down. "No, ma'am. Are you sure you know where you're going?" Samantha opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. Mrs. Green stepped forward, her voice low. "That man didn't offer you an education out of mercy. He sees something. And men like that, what they see, they want." "I'm not being taken advantage of," Samantha said, her voice more certain than she felt. "Maybe not yet." She left without another word. That evening, Nathaniel sat alone in his study, the fire crackling low. A decanter of brandy remained untouched. He read Samantha's latest copied passage, her handwriting still uneven but improving. She had underlined a line of verse. "She was not made to be subdued." He smiled without amusement. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Mrs. Green stepped inside, a ledger in one hand. "You're changing her." He glanced up. "Am I?" She was steady, Nathaniel, grounded. She's walking through this house like the floor no longer holds her. She's learning. She's being watched, not just by me, by everyone. He stood and moved to the window, the sky outside painted in the bruised tones of twilight. "Is it so wrong to lift someone beyond what life handed them?" Mrs. Green's voice hardened. "Not if you're honest about your reasons." He turned to her. "And if I don't know them yet?" She held his gaze. "Then be careful, because she will suffer the cost before you do." When she left, Nathaniel remained at the window long after the stars appeared. Samantha's days passed in a strange rhythm. She spoke less with the other maids, whose glances grew more resentful. At meals, she sat alone. In her room, she read under candlelight until her eyes blurred. Sometimes she caught sight of herself in the mirror and did not recognize the girl staring back. One afternoon, as she practiced curtsying in the hallway, she heard a low chuckle. Clarabelle Linton stood near the staircase, her hands resting on the polished banister. "Aren't you becoming quite the little lady?" Samantha straightened. "Miss Linton." Clarabelle descended the steps slowly, her gown a cascade of cream and gold. "I wonder," she said lightly, "what Mr. Pembury plans to do with his new creation once she's fully carved. Display you at dinner, introduce you at the ball." Samantha's throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, but you do. Everyone does." She reached forward, brushing a lock of hair from Samantha's cheek with mock tenderness. "Just remember, my dear, lace is delicate, but so very easy to unravel." She walked away, her perfume lingering like a bruise. Samantha stood alone, heart hammering, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for the first time she wondered whether knowledge in this house was not just power, but peril. By mid-July, the winds off the coast carried with them the scent of salt and possibility. The sunlight was brighter in Newport than Samantha had ever seen before, not because it was warmer or purer, but because it fell on things made to dazzle. Fountains, marble walkways, silk parasols, and chandeliers that caught the rays like prisms. Yet beneath the glitter of sea wind's grandeur, a quieter transformation had begun. Samantha moved through the house with growing assurance. Her posture, once cautious and guarded, had softened into something more composed, though not yet effortless. Each day, her hands traced words in borrowed novels, fingers lingering over pages as if the language might soak through her skin. She practiced walking across polished floors without the weight of a pail in her arms, her eyes focused straight ahead instead of on scuffed boots. In the late afternoons, when her lessons ended and the staff scattered to their duties, Samantha would sometimes slip away to the cliffs behind Seawind. There, where the ocean roared like a caged beast and the wind tangled itself in her hair, she could breathe without pretense. It was there that Nathaniel Pembury found her one evening, standing with her back to the house, her silhouette outlined against the molten horizon. He approached without a word, his boots crunching softly against gravel. She did not turn. "They say the tides are highest during a waxing moon," she said, her voice calm but distant. "Do you study astronomy now as well?" he asked, his tone light. She smiled faintly. "Only the things I can see." He came to stand beside her, his hands folded behind his back. For a long moment they said nothing. The wind toyed with the edge of his coat and tugged a ribbon loose from Samantha's braid. "You've changed," he said at last. "I've adapted." "There's a difference." She glanced at him then. "Adaptation doesn't always mean acceptance." Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her face. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in the way she held herself. Less like someone surviving and more like someone deciding who she wished to be. "You're angry," he said. "Not at you. Not entirely." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "That's generous." She shook her head. "It's simply honest." Their eyes held each other a moment too long. When she looked away, it was not from submission, but to spare them both the consequence of the silence that had begun to pulse between them. 2 days later, the garden luncheon commenced beneath a canopy of cream-colored silk, the air fragrant with lilac and the freshly clipped hedges of Seawind's elaborate topiary. The guests arrived in carriages that sparkled like brooches under the midday sun. Ladies in dresses of lemon chiffon and lavender tulle wandered the gravel paths like butterflies, their laughter trailing behind them in ribbons. Samantha had been assigned to assist with floral arrangements and serve refreshments, duties that allowed her to hover on the edges of society's glittering mirage without ever stepping fully into its light. She wore a soft grey dress, modest and well-fitted, her hair pinned with greater care than usual. No jewellery adorned her neck or ears, but the calm in her gaze was ornament enough. As she moved among the guests, balancing a silver tray with careful grace, snippets of conversation reached her ears. Stock tips, travel plans, careless complaints about the weight of satin in summer. And then she heard her name. "Is that her? The Pembury project?" The words came like a thorn in silk. "I heard she came from a pig farm. Wheat, I believe, though I suppose the mud looks the same." She continued forward, spine straight, tray steady. Near the white lilac hedge, Clarabelle Linton stood surrounded by a cluster of women who orbited her like gilded satellites. She held a delicate parasol and a glass of champagne, and when Samantha approached to refill it, Clarabelle did not move. "Ah," she said loudly, "the painted milkmaid arrives." The laughter that followed was light, ladylike, and merciless. Samantha felt the air shift. Every gaze turned toward her, some curious, others pitiful, a few eager for more. She steadied the tray. "Would you care for more champagne, Miss Linton?" Clarabelle tilted her head. "Tell me, Miss Talbot, does one learn to curtsy before or after learning to read the wine labels?" "I suppose it depends," Samantha said, her voice steady, "on whether one learns for knowledge or performance." There was a brief silence. Then Clarabelle's lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Well, how quaint." She held out her glass. Samantha refilled it with measured grace and turned away. Her cheeks burned, but she would not allow them to see her retreat. From across the lawn, Nathaniel had witnessed the entire exchange. He approached moments later, his presence parting the air around him like a ship through water. "Miss Linton," he said coldly, "you mistake cruelty for charm. Again." Clarabelle's smile froze. "I merely meant to—" "I'm aware of what you meant." He turned to Samantha then, his voice softer. "Would you walk with me, Miss Talbot?" For a heartbeat, Samantha considered refusing. But something in his expression, an apology unsaid, softened her. She placed the tray on a nearby table and followed him away from the gathering. Down a narrow path that led into the shaded arch of the rose garden, they walked in silence at first. "You didn't have to do that," she said eventually. "Yes," he replied. "I did." They reached the stone fountain in the garden's center. There, beneath the climbing roses, Samantha sat on the edge of the basin and looked down at her reflection in the water. "I will never be one of them," she said quietly. "That's not what this is about, isn't it?" He knelt beside the fountain, resting one hand on the carved edge. "You have more poise than any woman I've ever met, because yours was not taught. It was earned." She turned to him, her face close to his. "Then why do they laugh?" His voice dropped. "Because they are terrified of what doesn't bend to their rules." The wind stirred the roses overhead, and petals drifted between them like snow. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment, one breathless, suspended moment, neither of them moved. But the moment passed. Nathaniel stood. "You shouldn't let their words stain you." She rose as well. "It isn't the stain that bothers me. It's how quickly people look for it." And they returned to the luncheon in silence, neither one speaking of what had almost been spoken. Later that evening, in the billiards room of the Newport Gentlemen's Club, Trenton Hargrove lit a cigar and leaned back in a leather chair, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "So," he said, "your little orphan still survives the wolves." Charles Eddington snorted. "For now, but she won't last the month. Mark my words." "I plan to," Hargrove replied, amused. "There's money on it after all." They clinked glasses and laughed, their wager floating on the smoke, as hollow and pungent as their words. Back at Seawind, Samantha sat by her small window, a novel unopened in her lap, the moonlight casting her shadow across the floor. Her hands were still, but her eyes, those bright hazel-green eyes, remained awake. Outside, the sea murmured to the cliffs, patient and eternal. And beneath the grandeur of chandeliers and porcelain smiles, something deeper stirred, something not yet named, but impossible to silence. The days in Newport had grown longer, stretching themselves lazily between golden dawns and indigo twilights. At Seawind, roses bloomed in maddening profusion, spilling their scent across the terraces like perfume too heavily applied. Beneath the surface of this floral abundance, tension simmered, quiet, invisible, and thick as the summer heat. Clarabelle Linton had always been a woman who listened more than she spoke. Behind her powder and silks, she possessed the cold intuition of someone bred to dominate drawing rooms with gloved hands and sharpened smiles. She had noticed from the beginning the shift in Nathaniel Pembry, the way his gaze lingered too long, the way silence stretched when Samantha Talbot entered a room. And then, one afternoon in late July, gossip arrived like an invitation. A letter, folded twice and left unattended on a velvet chair in the men's lounge of the Newport Gentlemen's Club. One of Nathaniel's associates, drunk and careless, had written of the wager. Not in full detail, but enough. Enough to confirm the whispers Clarabelle had long suspected were more than just smoke. She did not confront. She collected. She waited. Every cruel scheme needed its season, and the season's end would bring with it a grand ball and a reckoning. Samantha, unaware of the growing storm, continued her studies and her duties with quiet diligence. Her mornings began with lessons, her afternoons with flower arrangements, light correspondence, or supervised walks along the estate gardens. Yet it was the evenings that had begun to hold something different, something quieter, more charged. One such evening, Nathaniel found her in the music room, alone. The room glowed with the last light of day, filtered through sheer curtains and falling gently upon the polished piano. Samantha was running her fingers across the keys, not playing, merely touching, as if trying to remember something. "Do you play?" he asked, standing at the threshold. She looked up, startled. "Only a little. There was an old piano in our parish back home. I used to sneak in during winter. It was always out of tune, but I liked the sound it made. Like a voice that had lived through sorrow." He stepped inside. "You surprise me more often than I'm comfortable admitting." She smiled, though her cheeks colored. "I don't intend to." He approached the piano, standing just beside her. "May I show you something?" She moved aside slightly. He sat, his fingers hovering over the keys, then pressing gently into a minor chord. The notes hung in the room like unspoken words. "There was someone once," he said, his eyes fixed on the ivory keys. "A long time ago. We were to be married." Samantha remained silent, sensing something fragile in his tone. Her name was Isabel. She was beautiful in the way that young men find captivating before they understand anything about the world. Her father approved because I was already a rising name. The match would elevate both families. "And yet she left you." He looked at her then. "Yes, for a man with a title, a minor baron from Kent. Less money, more lineage." Samantha's voice was soft. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did. But in truth, I loved what I believed we could become. She loved what I could give her until something shinier came along." The room filled with silence again, broken only by the gentle breath of the sea through the open windows. "I haven't spoken of her in years," he said. "Why now?" His eyes met hers. "Because you look at me without expectation, and I've begun to crave that honesty like air." Her breath caught. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, the restraint in his voice, the truth he dared not lean too far into. She rose. "I should go." He stood with her. "Yes, of course." But neither moved. Only when the air between them grew too thick to bear did she finally step away. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt, but her voice, when she spoke, was calm. "Good night, Mr. Pembry." "Good night, Miss Talbot." Later that night, Samantha passed Mrs. Green in the hallway, The older woman watched her closely. "You were in the music room." "Yes, I was helping Mr. Pembry find a passage in one of the lesson books." Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "At dusk?" Samantha's face remained composed. "It was a short conversation." Mrs. Green stepped closer. "You think you're standing on solid ground, child, but there's water under your feet, still and deep. I haven't done anything wrong. Not yet. Then why do you look at me as if I've lost my way?" Mrs. Green sighed. "Because the people who fall hardest are the ones who believe they're climbing." Samantha wanted to argue, to tell her that she was not naive, that she was strong enough to weather whatever storm might come, but the words would have rung hollow, because inside her uncertainty had begun to take root. The next morning, Samantha wrote to her mother. She wrote of the garden, of the piano, of the lessons. She did not mention Clarabelle's cutting remarks, nor the shift in the servants' glances. She did not speak of Nathaniel, but her final lines held a quiet urgency. "Please hold on a little longer. I believe the worst is behind us. I believe a change is coming. If I can stay until the end of the season, I think we might finally be safe." She folded the letter carefully and handed it to the courier herself. In town, Clarabelle sat in the shaded veranda of the Newport Ladies' Reading Club, sipping chilled tea and idly turning the pages of a French fashion journal. "You've gone very quiet," observed her companion, a young woman with a forgettable face and a talent for repeating things. "Quiet is not the same as passive," Clarabelle replied. She closed the journal and laid it aside. "Do you know what happens to women who forget their place in houses not built for them?" Her companion blinked. "They are dismissed." Clarabelle smiled slowly. "Oh no, they are displayed first, then dismissed. That's what makes the fall so delightful." That night, Nathaniel stood alone on the cliffside terrace, the sea wind tugging at his collar. He could not say what had begun to shift in him, only that when Samantha left a room, something stayed with him. An echo, a breath, the whisper of something he had not felt in years. Inside Seawind, candles flickered low, casting long shadows against the walls. And somewhere deep in the house, ghosts stirred, not of the dead, but of choices made, and the price of pretending they carried no consequence. The storm rolled in from the ocean like a beast unchained. Long before the first clap of thunder rattled the high windows of Seawind, the air had thickened with something electric. The seagulls had vanished from the cliffs. The roses drooped under a sky turned silver-grey, and the staff moved with quiet urgency, closing shutters and securing verandas with practiced hands. In the great hall, candles were lit earlier than usual, their flames bending beneath sudden gusts that slipped through the gaps in the old stone. Samantha stood at the tall windows of the east corridor, watching the first sheets of rain strike the hedges. Lightning split the clouds over the water, illuminating the churning waves in a flash of white fury. The sea, once distant, now seemed to press itself against the walls of the estate. She should have been afraid, but instead, she felt calm, as though the storm outside finally mirrored the one that had been slowly forming inside her. She turned at the sound of footsteps. Nathaniel approached with a lantern in hand. He was dressed in his evening clothes, though his collar was slightly loosened, as if the storm had unraveled something in him too. "The west chimney is leaking again," he said, with a flicker of dry amusement. "I've sent for extra firewood." She smiled faintly. "Will it hold?" "It has for 30 years, though not without complaint." They stood there side by side, gazing out at the ocean. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had become a kind of shelter. "Come," he said gently. "There's warmth in the library, and dry chairs." She followed him through the dim corridors of Seawind, where the candlelight trembled like breath. In the west library, the fire crackled, casting golden light across the spines of old books and the soft curve of the leather settee. A tray sat nearby, holding 2 cups of tea, untouched. Nathaniel gestured for her to sit. He took the armchair across from her, but angled toward the fire. For a long while they listened to the storm. "I used to think," Samantha said quietly, that storms were punishments. When I was a child, I believed they came because we hadn't prayed hard enough. And now, she tilted her head, now I think they're reminders that we are small and that something greater is always moving around us. He studied her, not her dress, not her posture, but her. You speak like someone who's seen more than her years. And you, Mr. Pembry, speak like a man who forgets that silence isn't the same as peace. A flash of surprise passed through his expression, then something softer. Admiration. Tell me, she said, curling her fingers around the warm cup, do you ever tire of pretending you're above it all? His breath caught. More often than you'd think. He stood and walked to the window, rain lashing the panes like frantic fingers. There are nights, he said, his voice low, when I wake and wonder how much of this I built because I wanted to belong, and how much I built simply to keep others out. Samantha stood, drawn by something she could not name. She crossed the room slowly, each step a question. When she reached him, they stood close enough for the warmth of the fire to touch them both. You don't have to be alone in your own house, she said. He looked down at her then. His hand lifted as if to touch her cheek, but stopped, hovering inches from her skin. His eyes searched hers. The moment stretched, sweet, silent, unbearable, and then a knock. They stepped apart. Mrs. Green stood in the doorway, her eyes unreadable. The second-floor chimney has flared again, she said calmly. The housekeeper's staff is attending to it. Nathaniel nodded. Thank you. She lingered. Her gaze moved to Samantha, then back to Nathaniel. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. When she left, the room felt colder. Later that night, Samantha sat in her small chamber, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She had lit only one candle. Outside, the storm howled, but inside her, it was the silence that pressed hardest. There was a soft knock at her door. A letter, no name, just her own. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was uneven but familiar. It was from her younger brother, Henry. Dearest Sam, your last parcel reached us in time. Mother wept. The banker came again last week, but Papa showed him your note and your earnings. The man left with his hat in his hand. They've called off the auction. For now, the land is still ours. I told little May you sent the ribbon for her hair. She won't take it off, even sleeps in it. Sam, I don't know how you're doing this or what it cost you, but please know we're holding on because of you. With love, always, Henry. She folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. The storm could have broken every window in the house, and she wouldn't have felt it. The following morning, the skies had cleared, but the air was heavy with things left unsaid. Samantha moved through the halls like a woman in two worlds, one of duty, the other of longing. Her heart, once a distant drumbeat, now thudded loudly beneath her bodice. In the garden, among the dripping roses, Clarabelle appeared without warning. How touching, she said. You and Mr. Pembry sharing stormy secrets by the fire. Samantha stiffened. I'm afraid I don't understand. Clarabelle stepped closer. Her gloves were cream-colored, spotless. Oh, but you do. The house whispers, Miss Talbot. And I happen to be a very good listener. Samantha met her gaze. If you have something to say, Miss Linton, say it plainly. Clarabelle smiled. Very well. Be careful, my dear. Men like Nathaniel Pembry do not rescue. They collect. And when they're finished with their toys, they place them back where they found them, quiet, grateful, and forgotten. Samantha said nothing, but her eyes did not lower. Clarabelle stepped back. He won't protect you from the wolves. Not when they come wearing pearls. Then she turned, her skirts brushing the wet stone, and vanished into the hedge-lined path. That night, as Samantha wrote her reply to Henry, she paused. She thought of the firelight, of Nathaniel's voice, of the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She dipped her pen again. Tell May to keep the ribbon. There's more coming soon. And tell Mama I'm not done yet. She sealed the letter, and this time she did not send it with trembling hands. The day began like any other. The house was bathed in golden morning light, soft as cream, and the halls of sea wind glowed with their usual quiet order. Samantha carried a tray of correspondence through the east corridor, her steps light, her eyes distant. She had learned to move like a shadow in this world, present but not disruptive. Every thread of her gown lay smooth, every pin in her hair placed with care. From the outside, she looked the part, but inside, she still walked a tightrope made of borrowed confidence and soft resolve. That was when she heard them. Two footmen standing just around the corner, voices low but careless. "Did you see her yesterday, taking notes like a governess?" "What notes? She's just a bet, a parlour trick. And a costly one at that. Eddington says Pembrey'll win, but only because he's playing the long game. Sooner or later she'll believe it herself." A pause, then laughter. "Poor thing probably thinks she's special." Samantha stopped walking. The tray in her hands trembled. Her breath caught. For a moment, the walls of sea wind closed in around her, and every step she had taken since her arrival echoed back at her, hollow. She did not wait for more. She turned, steady now, and walked quickly, directly, through the corridor, past the salon, past the library, and into the smaller side hallway that led to the conservatory. Nathaniel would be there. He often reviewed estate papers at that hour, where the light was best. He looked up as she entered. "Miss Talbot, is it true?" Her voice was quiet, too quiet. He rose slowly, a crease forming between his brows. "What are you referring to?" "That I was a wager. That you and your friends placed bets on whether I could be turned into something worth displaying." He did not speak. That silence told her everything. "Tell me," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, tell me it wasn't real." He moved toward her, slow and deliberate. "It began that way," he said at last. "Yes." Her hand came up, not in anger, but as if to physically hold back the blow of his words. "Samantha, don't say my name like that." "It changed," he insisted, eyes desperate now. "What began in cruelty became something else. You became something else. I saw it. Your mind, your voice, your strength. It was never a game to me after that." She stepped back. "But I was never given the choice to know what I was to you. You were never just anything." Her hands trembled at her sides. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. The silence between them now was a chasm, and she stood at its edge. "I'll leave after the ball," she said. "Not before. I won't give them the satisfaction. Don't. Please, don't let them take from you what you've built. They didn't take it. You did." And then she was gone. Nathaniel stood in the center of the conservatory, surrounded by flowers and light and the echo of his own failure. The doors creaked open again some minutes later. Mrs. Green entered. She closed the door behind her. "I assume you didn't think I'd find out?" He didn't answer. "She's leaving." "I know." Mrs. Green walked forward, slow and firm. "You had a chance, Nathaniel, not just to do good, but to be good. You were handed a rare gift in that girl's trust, and you crushed it beneath your heel. It wasn't meant to go this far. That's the problem with men like you. You play with matches, and are shocked when the house burns." He turned toward her. His voice was ragged. "I will make it right." "How? With more money, another lesson?" "No." He met her eyes. "I don't know yet, but I will find a way." Mrs. Green stared at him for a long moment. "You'd better pray you do," she said, "because if you don't, all the power you've built won't be enough to shield you from what comes next." Then she turned and left him there, alone, in a house full of beauty, with not a single corner that did not now echo with shame. That evening, Samantha sat beneath the sloped ceiling of her room, reading and rereading the letter from her brother. She no longer cried. She had already done that, in the shadows, behind the kitchen door, in the stillness of the library. Her tears were spent. She reached for a piece of stationery, laid it on the desk, and began to write by lamplight. "Dearest Henry, I'm still safe. I'll be home soon. Tell Mama to keep the garden blooming." I miss the sound of her voice when she scolds the hens. Tell May that her ribbon is a good luck charm, and to guard it well, and tell Papa—" I did what I could. She paused. I tried. She folded the letter carefully. Her hand hovered over the envelope before she sealed it. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains. The sea was calm again, but Samantha knew better than to trust calm. Storms didn't always roar. Some whispered. No expense had been spared. In the days leading up to the summer ball, sea wind shimmered with preparation. The grand hall was polished until its floors mirrored the chandeliers above. Gardeners worked by moonlight to prune every hedge, every bloom, until not a single petal stood out of place. Crates of champagne arrived from France. Musicians were hired from New York, their reputations as gilded as their instruments. And above it all, Samantha Talbot existed, like a thread pulled taut between defiance and heartbreak. She had not spoken to Nathaniel since the confrontation. Her duties had been reassigned, her lessons silently concluded. But Mrs. Green insisted she attend the ball, her voice firm in the tone of a woman who had seen far too many things unravel in silence. "You walk in there on your own terms," the housekeeper had said, adjusting the pins in Samantha's hair. "You face them. You leave with your head high. That is the dignity they'll never teach." And so, on the night of the ball, Samantha stood before the mirror in the west chamber, wearing a borrowed gown the color of seafoam and sorrow. The silk hugged her waist and fell in soft waves to the floor, embroidered at the hem with tiny pearls. Her hair was twisted into an elegant knot, strands left loose to frame her face. A single silver hairpin, Mrs. Green's own, sat above her left ear. She had never looked more like a lady, but she had never felt more like a stranger. The ballroom doors opened at precisely 8 o'clock. Newport's finest arrived in gleaming carriages, their laughter sharp, their diamonds sharper. The women floated in gowns of tulle and taffeta, their gloved hands brushing against champagne flutes and social ambition. The men spoke in murmurs of business, bloodlines, and summer estates. Nathaniel Pembry stood at the base of the grand staircase, impeccably dressed in black evening tails. His expression betrayed nothing. But when he saw Samantha enter, his gaze did not shift. For a single breath, the room quieted. She descended slowly, each step measured, each heartbeat louder than the orchestra. A polite applause followed her final step. But it was the hush, the charged, assessing hush that said everything. She was not meant to shine among them, and yet she did. The evening unfolded in a blur of formalities, dancing, toasts, conversations draped in velvet politeness. Samantha did not speak much, but she moved with practiced grace, her chin lifted, her hands steady. At the midpoint of the night, the music paused. Nathaniel stepped forward. "May I ask a favor of our guest of honor?" he said, his voice carrying across the marble. Samantha froze. "Miss Talbot, would you play for us?" The room turned to her. She could have refused. She should have. But she walked to the piano instead. She sat, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. The silence was heavy, expectant. And then music. Soft, fragile at first, then steady. A melody as delicate as porcelain and as resilient as iron. A piece Nathaniel had once shown her, now reshaped by her hands. She did not play as a girl from Pennsylvania. She did not play as a maid. She played as a woman who had lived every note. When the final chord faded, there was silence, then applause, scattered, uncertain, then building. And that was when Clarabelle stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Charming," she said sweetly, her champagne flute raised. "Truly. It's remarkable what a few months and a wager can do." The applause stilled. "What did you say?" someone asked. Clarabelle smiled. "Oh, come now. Let's not pretend. This delightful transformation was born not of charity, but of sport. Isn't that right, Mr. Pembry?" Gasps echoed across the marble. All eyes turned to Nathaniel. He stood very still. Then he stepped forward. "She is correct," he said clearly. The room erupted in murmurs. Nathaniel raised his hand. "But she is only half right. Yes, a wager was made. Yes, I participated. And yes, it began as an act of pride." He turned to face the crowd fully. "But what none of you saw was what happened next. This woman, this extraordinary woman, earned every ounce of what she carries now, with dignity, with grace, with brilliance." He turned to Samantha. "And I am ashamed, not of her, but of myself." Silence. The kind that presses against your skin. Some guests stepped back, others exchanged glances. A few turned to leave, but many remained. Samantha stood frozen, every part of her exposed. She looked at Clarabelle. "You tried to humiliate me." Clarabelle lifted her chin. "I simply told the truth." "No, you told part of it. The rest is mine, and I will not let you steal it." She turned, crossed the ballroom and left, not running, walking. As the doors closed behind her, the ballroom remained stunned. The chandelier above flickered, and Sea Wind, for the first time in its grand history, knew what it was to tremble from within. The train pulled into the station with a sigh of steam and iron. Samantha stepped onto the familiar wooden platform of her hometown, the scent of warm earth and late summer clover curling into her chest like a memory-made flesh. In her hands she carried no trunk, only a modest carpet-bag and the weight of a season that had stripped her, revealed her, and rebuilt her in equal measure. The farm appeared over the crest of the hill, just as it always had. Its whitewashed fences slightly crooked, the barn roof patched with mismatched shingles. Yet as she walked the dirt road that led home, children's laughter erupted from the porch. Henry, her youngest brother, bolted across the yard barefoot, leaving behind a crooked kite and a barking mutt. "Samantha, you came back!" She knelt in the dust as he flung himself into her arms. Behind him, her mother appeared on the porch, apron dusted with flour, her cheeks damp. And just beyond, her father, thinner now but smiling in the amber light, raised a calloused hand in greeting. Dinner was humble. Fresh bread, corn stew, pickled onions. And yet it felt like a feast. After the meal, as the sun dipped below the fields, her mother lingered beside her on the porch swing. "You look taller," she said softly. Samantha smiled. "It's the boots. Not in inches, my love. In presence." That night, Samantha stood by the upstairs window, listening to the wind comb through the wheat. She touched the silver hairpin still tucked in her satchel, the one Mrs. Green had pinned above her ear at the summer ball, and let her tears fall silently into the dark. Miles away, Sea Wind stood shuttered. The iron gates had been locked, the household staff dismissed with generous severance. The marble floors, once echoing with footsteps and piano chords, were now silent beneath dust covers, and Nathaniel Pembry walked its halls alone. The scandal had reached the clubs of New York and the drawing rooms of Newport with startling speed. Some whispered that he had gone mad, others speculated he had lost a fortune in a lawsuit. But no one spoke openly of the wager, not because it was unknown, but because it was unbecoming. Clarabelle, meanwhile, found her invitations dwindling. She remained beautiful, wealthy, and well-connected, but now she was something else too. Untrustworthy, cruel, dangerous to be associated with. She arrived at teas only to find the seating rearranged. At garden parties, the ladies whispered behind fans. A scandal, once unleashed, rarely returned to its cage. Nathaniel's name vanished from philanthropic committees. His portrait at the Newport Gentlemen's Society was quietly removed from the vestibule. He said little in protest. Instead, he sold one of his rail interests and quietly diverted the funds to endow schools in rural Pennsylvania, where no one knew his name and no one cared. He paid for books, for buildings, for widows to take in students during harvest seasons. He did not sign the donations, and he wrote. The first letter was an apology. Samantha burned it. The second came weeks later. It did not beg forgiveness. It simply described a patch of sea lavender blooming along the cliffs, a storm that broke over the bay. A question, do you miss the music? She read it 3 times before folding it away. The third letter came with a pencil sketch, a field, a barn, a windmill. Her home, rendered in firm, uncertain strokes. She replied, "The roof is still crooked, but the land is ours." They did not write often. But the silence between letters became less about distance and more about waiting. Henry ran in with the post each week, cheeks flushed. Her mother said little, but her smile was knowing. Samantha worked the land with her father, took in sewing from neighbors, and slowly the calluses returned to her hands, not from scrubbing chandeliers, but from labor that fed her. One Sunday, as church bells rang across the valley, Samantha passed a shop window where a piano rested behind the glass. Not grand, not polished, just a simple upright, slightly out of tune. She entered. "May I?" she asked the shopkeeper. He nodded. She sat, lifted the fallboard, and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers hesitated, then found the beginning. The same melody. Softer now, slower, but wholly hers. Outside, passers-by paused to listen. That evening, she wrote back, "Yes, I miss the music, but I found other notes to carry." Seawind remained closed. Nathaniel rarely left its walls. He walked the gardens alone, the scent of salt and lavender in the air. The staff had gone, but Mrs. Green visited once, unannounced. She found him on the cliffs, hat in hand. "I never asked your forgiveness," he said. "It's not mine to give," she replied. "But if you want to rebuild, start with your own ruins, not hers." He nodded. "And stop sending her letters like a schoolboy," she added. "Write something worth reading." He smiled. The next letter arrived a month later. Inside was no apology, only a poem, and a single pressed flower. Sea lavender. It was late spring when Samantha returned to the cliffs of Seawind. The carriage that had brought her from the station creaked to a halt beneath a grove of wind-bent cypresses. The driver tipped his hat and said nothing. He had been paid in advance. Samantha stepped down, her boots meeting gravel that felt softer than she remembered, though perhaps it was only her heart that had changed. The estate had lost its shine. Gone were the footmen, the polished brass, the floral arrangements bursting from crystal vases. The gates stood open, unguarded. The windows wore no lace. Seawind looked like a place stripped of vanity, and in that simplicity it felt truer. She did not knock. She walked through the front door, which stood ajar, and found the parlour dusted, quiet, and smelling faintly of beeswax and sea salt. A single vase of wild violets rested on the mantel. Mrs. Green was the first to appear. Her hair had greyed more. Her walk was slower, but the arch of one eyebrow remained sharp as ever. "You came," she said, as if Samantha were late to supper rather than returning after a year. Samantha smiled. "Is he here?" "Out by the cliffs. Same spot. Hasn't moved since breakfast." Samantha hesitated. "He won't say anything foolish," Mrs. Green added, softening. "Not unless you let him." The sky was soft with mist as she stepped through the garden. The roses were blooming, a pale blush, not ostentatious but tender. The path curved toward the cliffs, where the sea below frothed against the rocks, repeating its ancient lullaby. Nathaniel stood at the edge. No coat, no gloves. His hair was tousled by the wind, and his posture carried no entitlement, only waiting. He turned before she spoke. "You came," he said, and the words caught on something fragile. "You asked." A long silence stretched between them, not empty but filled with what had passed, what remained, and what had not yet been spoken. "I have nothing to offer," he said finally. "No title, no lavish promises. Seawind is quieter now, smaller. I've sold most of the holdings. The schools continue. I visit them. Sometimes I fix shutters or build desks." She stepped closer, her hands folded before her. "You didn't ask me here for comfort." "No," he said. "Only honesty. And a life that might be less gilded, but more real." They stood in the wind, the ocean tossing salt into their faces. It was not a grand moment. It was a true one. Behind them, Mrs. Green waited beneath the arbor, where a few folding chairs had been arranged among the rose bushes. A linen runner stretched over an old table. A simple cake rested on a ceramic plate. There was no orchestra, no guest list, only the steady presence of those who mattered. Samantha wore a dress of soft green cotton, stitched with care, unadorned by lace or pearls. Her hair was pinned simply, a sprig of lavender tucked behind one ear. Mrs. Green officiated. Her voice was hoarse from years of command, but steady. Samantha and Nathaniel spoke no vows of opulence or grandeur, only promises of effort, of presence, of speaking plainly and listening deeply. When asked if she wished to add anything, Samantha walked to the piano set near the roses. The same upright from the parlor had been rolled outside. She sat, adjusted her skirt and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She played the same piece from the summer ball. But this time, it was not a performance. It was a reclamation. The notes rose into the wind, carrying no agenda, only memory. Her eyes did not seek applause. Her hands did not tremble. Her gaze found Nathaniel's, steady, certain. When the final note faded, the guests remained quiet. Henry sniffed, holding back tears. Her mother reached for her father's hand. A robin chirped from the arbor. They kissed, not as a prince and a prize, nor as a gentleman and a transformation, but as two people who had seen the worst and chosen to walk forward anyway. Afterward, they cut the cake with a butter knife. Mrs. Green toasted with lemonade. Someone played a fiddle. Clarabelle was not there. No one mentioned her. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Nathaniel walked with Samantha along the cliffs. Her hand rested in the crook of his arm. "What will you do now, Mrs. Pembry?" She smiled. "I'll start with tomorrow." They stopped near the place where he had once watched storms roll in alone. Now they watched together. Behind them, sea wind glowed not with chandeliers, but with candlelight, soft, honest, enduring. The girl they had once wagered against had become a woman who built her own future, and this time no one would bet against her and win. The house on the cliffs had changed once more. Seawind no longer stood as a monument to wealth or shame. It had become something quieter, something sacred. Wild roses now claimed the garden paths. A modest schoolroom had been added to the western wing, where Samantha taught reading and arithmetic to the children of local fishermen and seamstresses. Chalk dust lived on her skirts more often than salt spray. Nathaniel had aged gently. The sharpness of ambition had softened into the steadiness of purpose. He spent mornings in the orchard behind the house, afternoons writing letters to donors or visiting the small schools his foundation now supported across 3 states. He no longer chased power. He built futures. They lived simply, but not quietly. Music filled their rooms. Laughter, too. Sometimes Henry visited with a suitcase full of new sheet music and a head full of big ideas. He was a teacher now. Other times, Samantha's mother arrived with jam jars and folded quilts, teasing Nathaniel about his boots by the door. Mrs. Green remained at Seawind until her bones told her it was time to rest. Her final request had been to be buried near the roses. A bench was carved in her honor. Samantha often sat there in the mornings, with a book in her lap and a breeze at her back. Clarabelle Linton had not fared as well. The scandal had lingered like smoke on silk. Though she was never formally shunned, invitations dwindled. Her family married her off to a distant cousin in Providence, a man with thinning hair and a cold laugh. Gossip said she hosted endless luncheons, hoping to recapture a spotlight that had dimmed for good. Society, too, had begun to shift. Newport's golden veneer cracked as newer voices called for labor rights and land reforms. The extravagance of the past now felt fragile beside the grit of progress. Samantha and Nathaniel welcomed speakers and thinkers into their home, not to dazzle, but to listen. One autumn afternoon, a girl in braids ran into the parlor with a torn copy of Little Women, begging Mrs. Pembry to mend it. Samantha knelt beside her, sewing needle in hand. "Is it your favorite?" she asked. The child nodded fiercely. Mine too, Samantha said, but not because the girl marries the rich man, because she refuses to be anything less than herself. The girl beamed. Outside, Nathaniel watched through the window, a smile hidden in the lines of his face. Love had endured, not because it was grand, but because it had been stripped bare, examined and rebuilt with care. Not a soul in Newport dared bet against the woman on the cliff, and if they had, they'd have lost. Some stories linger long after the final word is spoken, and Samantha's is one of them. A tale of quiet resilience, of dignity forged in silence, of love earned through honesty rather than power. In a world that once wagered against her, she did not shatter, she rose. Perhaps her journey reminds us that transformation does not require permission, that the opinions of the world weigh less than the voice we carry within, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in walking away from the ballroom, to build something more lasting at the shoreline. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own journey or someone you love, tell us in the comments. Let us know you stayed with Samantha until the very end by writing the word unbreakable below. We'll be watching for it and cherishing everyone. If you'd like to help us continue bringing these emotional historical romances to life, consider sending a super thanks on YouTube with whatever amount feels right to you. Every bit of support helps us keep crafting these stories with care. And if that's not possible right now, no worries. Just sharing this video with someone who might love it is already a powerful way to help our channel grow. Don't forget to explore the other unforgettable period romances I've linked in the cards. Each one carries a world of its own, waiting to be discovered. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for joining us on this journey.